the panelists, and I mistakenly forgot to introduce Roz Switzer, who you have been able to see. Roz is a broadband leader with Great Old Broads for Wilderness, as well as the Pactivist leader for the Lobos Rising, which is the Phoenix group that works on Mexican gray wolf. And she's been managing some of the questions that have been coming in, so thanks a lot. She also is going to be presenting next week on Tuesday at the next webinar. I am going to send out some more information after this by email with some links on how to comment, and we'll eventually have the video from this webinar up, and I can include that link as well so you can share. I think we'll just head into some of these questions. There's some really good ones here. There's two about Mexico that I might shoot to you, Dave, first off. Are the wolves that are in Mexico of the same lineage as the wolves in New Mexico and Arizona? And also, does Mexico conduct annual counts of their wild Mexican wolves? And if so, what is the estimated number as of the beginning of this year?
Thank you. And hi, Jerry. I hope you're doing well. They're essentially from the same gene pool because the captive breeding program operates on a binational level with Mexican zoos and U.S. zoos trading wolves all the time. So there's just one captive Mexican wolf gene pool. The ones in Mexico might have a slightly different mix of the three lineages that were merged in captivity, but for the most part, they're from the same population as the wolves in the United States. So if you're thinking we might get new genes by letting wolves come out of Mexico into the US or vice versa, not likely. The new genes that we need are still in the captive population and haven't yet been moved out to the wild population. I think there was a follow-up to that. I think the last I heard, the population in Mexico was somewhere in the range of 30 wolves.
Great, thanks. There's a couple questions about the captive wolves as well. One from Catherine, who volunteers at the California Wolf Center in Julian, California. And they're an active part of the species survival plan. And in the past few years, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have only used cross-fostering to reintroduce captive-born wolves. There are, I believe, close to 500 Mexican gray wolves in captivity right now. So many could be released into the wild. Are U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service going to allow the release of adult captive-bred Mexican gray wolves rather than just pups to improve the genetic pool? And of the 163 wolves in the wild, how many are from captivity? Jean, do you want to take that one?
Helps to unmute yourself. With regard to whether they will allow these adult releases, they didn't propose any, either I believe last year or this year. There's nothing preventing them from doing so. And that's one of the things that probably some of our watchers, our audience this evening, might want to mention as they go forward writing some comments. It's certainly something that would make a lot of sense from the point of view of a lot of us, our thoughts on it. With regard to how many, there were 12 pups cross-fostered last year. How many of those survive is unknown. I know there are a couple of them that were collared, I believe, but as far as we know, the vast majority of them are what are called lost to follow-up or fate unknown. That doesn't mean they're all dead. Some of them will turn up a couple of years from now alive. They'll be caught and collared. But a fair number of those may not be alive any longer. So in terms of ones that have been without any wild experience until now, probably just those pups. And of course, they've been raised in wild dens, so it's a little different situation from where you would have an adult pair with a bunch of pups that were released. That has not happened, I believe, since 2006, roughly.
Thanks, Jean. Regina from Endangered Wolves Center. Wait, did I say that right? Yeah.
Endangered-
Yeah, thank you. Clarified that there are 300 wolves in captive, the captive program. Thanks, Regina. This is a good question. I think is worth noting. What is the general public's attitude toward wolves in Arizona and New Mexico? Yeah, who wants to take that one? I know we recently got some polling out on that, and I wonder if anybody wants to speak to that.
I can talk briefly about it. I know that in both Arizona and New Mexico, even within the recovery areas in the specific counties here in New Mexico, that's Catron and Grants counties, there is still majority support for the reintroductions of Mexican gray wolves and just endangered species more broadly. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I know I'm pretty sure in the general public it was 70% plus in both states. And then in New Mexico, at least, it was, I think, 50 something percent, 59, I want to say, in Catron and Grants counties, still supported the reintroduction of Mexican gray wolves. So at least privately, people do support it. It might be harder to speak up publicly about it, given the social pressure, but it's definitely something that we want to be able to make sure we're getting across to our elected officials and to US FWS that there's broad support for the recovery of this species from everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Trey. That's good. There's a question about how we feel our prospects are for following the scoping period for a favorable ruling to extend beyond the I40 boundary, and that's that northern boundary that I think Trey had and we had referred to. Yeah, so this is a really good opportunity to potentially get more wolves north of there. Does anybody feel hopeful and want to share that?
Well, I'll take a crack at it. This is our last best hope to make that happen. And the way we make that happen is to turn out all the pressure we can on the Fish and Wildlife Service through public support for that option. It has to happen. We've got to break down that barrier. There are key habitats north of I40 that scientists have identified that are critical to recovering Mexican wolves in the US Southwest. There's no scientific justification for that I40 boundary. Even in the notes of one of the recovery team meetings, they said publicly, it's in the public record, that they established the boundary at I40 for geopolitical reasons. So it's not scientific. Wolves need to roam wherever they think they can find the best habitat, and we need to let them do that. So that's a key talking point that we put forth in our recommendations to try to get the Fish and Wildlife Service to eliminate that boundary. It's very critical.
Oh, that's great. Dave, while you're still unmuted, there's a question about with the inbreeding of the wolves. Are there reports of behavioral issues or effects from that?
There's some information in the literature. The geneticists have looked at that. They found evidence of inbreeding depression in terms of smaller litter sizes. The problem with measuring that in the field is that a lot of the wolves are supplementally fed, and that most genetic scientists believe can mask the effects of a pup that's born with maybe less than the vitality that it would need to survive under wild conditions. But if they have food provided, then they will survive, and that bumps up the pup's survival rate. So it's a difficult question to answer through field research because of primarily that one factor. But most geneticists believe that it's a serious problem, and that if without that supplemental feeding program, we would see more effects of inbreeding.
There's a question about how long it might. So how would the reintroduction of the wolf from captivity really to provide adequate genetic? So how long would it take if we were to start releasing those wolves? How long would it take to be able to get to that sustainable population? Would that take a long time?
Yes, probably a long time. What has happened is that so much of the captured gene diversity has already been lost, that the amount of improvement to the genetics of the wild population that's even possible if everything was done right is not potentially significant. As long as 2007, there was a paper published by two geneticists, Rich Fredrickson and Phil Hedrick, that looked at the genetic status of the Mexican wolves, both wild and captive, and noted all the declines in the genetic measures. And they speculated then that we were on a path where we may have to do, as was done with the Florida panthers, bring in related wolves from another population. That would be the northern gray wolves, most likely, to supplement the gene pool. You can actually pump in new genes pretty quickly, then back cross with the original stock, and you maintain what looks and acts and behaves like a Mexican wolf, but it's got an enriched gene diversity. We may be headed there. I think we're probably headed there before it's all said and done.
That's great, thank you. Let's move, these are all great questions, thank you all. And we may not get to them all, but let's see. There's one, I'm not a hunter, but I do know that hunting advocacy groups can be important partners in environmental preservation. Are you reaching out to those groups to discuss the positive impact wolves have on game animals such as elk? Anybody want to take that one? Or even just that relationship to elk? I know, Trey, you talked a little bit about that in your presentation.
Yeah, I know that at the Endangered Species Coalition, we do work with partners that, you know, are hunting, National Wildlife Federation, for example, and they are on certain issues very much on our side, and they do understand the importance of preserving predator species for the overall health of prey species. And I kind of think what goes back to what Dave had mentioned about Ada Leopold's quote, where when you have too much deer, elk, or just species like that roaming the mountainside, they are, you know, not letting the forest grow, and they're chewing up all the trees. And these, you know, the predator species can keep them at bay, and they also take out the sick ones and the weak ones, and it can leave the stronger species, individuals within the elk species or whatever species you're talking about, for the hunters. So I think these groups do get that, and we do work with them, at least here at the coalition.
Thanks. We'll do just a couple more. There's a question about are U.S. Fish and Wildlife prosecuting poaching to the full extent of the law? So some questions about poaching, and also questions about, there's a question about non-lethal mitigation for those livestock losses. Not the same thing, obviously, but in terms of the loss of wolves, which has been a real issue, what are some things that people can be advocating for to protect the wolves from being either killed or removed from the wild? Jean or Dave, if you have anything.
Well, there are a number of things we can advocate for, and the slate's wide open because the rule's wide open for revision. The judge identified about 9 issues that need to be addressed, and one of those is to reduce human-caused mortality. And human-caused mortality is the most significant mortality factor affecting the growth of the Mexican wolf population. So getting a handle on poaching is a big deal. We have a serious problem there, in that the Justice Department has implemented a policy that essentially says you can't prosecute somebody for killing a wolf unless you could prove that they knew it was wolf when they shot it. And that has led to many years of poachers pleading, well, I thought it was a coyote, and they get off the hook, they don't get prosecuted. So that's a significant barrier. It's a policy called the McKittrick policy, and we need to put pressure on the Justice Department to change it, but I doubt we'll get that out of our current Justice Department. That's a major obstacle. Beyond that, there are other ways that wolves die from human causes. A significant one is that private trapping is allowed in all the areas where Mexican wolves are being recovered on all the public lands. From 1998 to 2018 is the data set we have from the Fish and Wildlife Service. 50 wolves have been caught by private trappers. Some of those have died, some have lost legs to amputation. Others had to be returned to captivity. And who knows how many wolves are caught in traps and never reported. So one simple move, and we've identified this in our talking points, is to have the new rule just prohibit the trapping by private entities in the wolf recovery area. That would make a big difference.
That's great. Yeah, go ahead, Dean. Oh, you're muted here. Hang on. Wait, Dean.
I clicked it, but I guess I didn't click it hard
It
enough.
has to happen on every webinar.
Yeah, I was going to say that with regard to the non-lethal measures to deter wolves from taking livestock, there are several groups that work on those specific issues. One of them is Defenders of Wildlife, who are putting most of their effort these days into working with livestock owners, permittees on public lands in terms of coming up with non-lethal methods, and they get cooperation from some and not so much cooperation from others. Also, there's a Mexican Wolf Fund, which operates out of California. It's connected, I'm not sure exactly how, but it's connected with the California Wolf Center, which is a captive breeding facility in Julian, California. Both of those are working on it, and I believe there are some others as well. And then the group Wild Earth Guardians is working to try to get permanent retirement, eventually voluntary retirement of grazing permits, which would be helpful for a lot of reasons, not all having to do with wolves. So those are groups that are doing that kind of thing. So if your people in the audience are interested in those issues, they might contact those groups. Defenders of Wildlife, California Wolf, Mexican Wolf Fund, and if you can't find it, you can probably go to California Wolf Center and they will put you in touch. And then finally, Wild Earth Guardians, all three of those.
Great. There's a couple questions about Colorado in terms of there's going to be a ballot measure to have a reintroduction program starting in there. That is historically part of the range for the Mexican gray wolves. And so there's a couple questions about what can be done to encourage that that reintroduction include Mexican gray wolves, and would that be a good thing?
I wonder if Trey might take that, because his organization spans both states. If he's comfortable, if not, I'll take a stab at it.
Yeah, I don't specifically do Colorado stuff myself, but I know my partner Haley does. My understanding, and I don't know if anyone in here can correct me, but I believe that the ballot initiative itself does not specify which wolf will be reintroduced, but rather would direct the legislature to direct the Colorado, is it Parks and I don't know the name of Colorado's agency, but would direct the agency in Colorado to decide what wolf would be reintroduced. So as far as which wolf to push for, I think it would be great to have the Mexican gray wolf. It's more habitat, more range for them. It gets them above I40. But yeah, I can't really speak too much more to that.
I can follow up a little bit on that. There was a recovery team formed in 1910 that had a science group that was all independent scientists, and they put forth a recovery plan that identified 3 populations in the Southwest that were critical to recovering Mexican wolves. One of those spanned the New Mexico-Colorado border in the San Juan Mountains. And that it was determined through habitat suitability studies that was a prime node for one of the 3 populations that were necessary to recovery wolves. So I know there are those, and myself included, that if Colorado initiative passes and Colorado has to restore wolves, we'll be pushing hard for them to accept Mexican gray wolves as the reintroduction stock for at least the southern part of Colorado.
Great. I like this question. What would be a good career to help wolves?
Well, repeat that question.
What would be a good career to help wolves?
It depends on how hands-on you want to get. I don't have the experience Dave has, of course. I'm not a, I don't study biology. For me, it's, all about policy and I don't know, a lot of it's like Endangered Species Act protection stuff, but I don't know. What do you think?
Right now, the biggest opportunities are with citizen activists and environmental attorneys. So plenty of work for environmental attorneys, because that's where we make all our progress. So,
Dave, that's exactly what I was going to say. Go to law school, specialize in environmental law, and go to work for one of the outfits like Earth Justice, or there are many others, Western Environmental Law and others, because I don't think we're going to run out of things for you to do if you do that. There's going to be plenty of work ahead.
I would add, though, I would not discourage any wannabe wildlife biologists from taking a job with the agency, because we do need good scientists at the base level on staff in the agency, even though they're often overridden by political decisions. But if we didn't have them, it would be dismal. So I stuck it out for 24 years working for the Fish and Wildlife Service and managed to make some change. So it's worthwhile.
That's great. All right, we'll do one more, and then we can start wrapping up here. But I thought this was a good one that just came in. Are the missing comb bristles lost to both the wild and captive population, Dave? Would increased captive to wild breeding, fostering increase that, or would those variants only be reintroduced from bringing in generic gray wolves?
Boy, I had a hard time understanding that question.
Well, I think it's basically, how can you fill in those missing comb bristles? What's the best way? Is it from the captive population, or would you need to bring in other gray wolves? Generic, I like that, but other gray wolves.
Those are gone. They're not left in the entire Mexican wolf genome. So you would have to bring in other unrelated wolves to fill those broken combed teeth. Yeah.
So maybe somebody should become a geneticist as well. That would help.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, okay, add that to the career list. Well, that's great. There's been some other references here, especially to Texas, possible expansion to the east. And I think there may be some references to that in the call on Tuesday. And then there was also some questions about, there was one question, were wolves from the tribes included in the count? There is an active program on White Mountain Apache tribal land, and I was just going to mention that the count is counting the collared wolves, but there are probably other wolves out there that are not collared, including on the White Mountain Apache reservation. So the count is always sort of the minimum, or the collared wolves, which hopefully there are more. Is that accurate?
Not quite.
Oh, thanks.
There are only about 70 some collared wolves. So they count those that they can find, and then in the process of counting, they see other wolves with them and confirm those as well, or tracks or sign. It's a combination of information that goes to the estimating the count. And as to whether the wolves on the tribal lands are counted, I honestly don't know. But
I believe they are, Dave.
I thought so
At
too.
least they used to be, and I think they still are, but they don't report things like how many in each pack and how many pups they have and that kind of thing. There's little reporting done other than they have the data. The project has the information, but I don't believe they put it out because the tribes consider it proprietary information. That's what I've been told.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think we'll wrap up tonight. Thank you all so much for bringing all of your expertise and experiences and stories. And thank you all for attending and being part of this. And I will send out a follow-up with links. And oh, there's a wolf now. Thank you all so much. And I hope you all stay safe and have a good evening.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, everybody.